Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Hope you're enjoying studying history of English literature. This is your lecture number 4, and previously I gave you the briefing of all the periods in the history of English literature, plus we have talked about literature in general, relationship of literature with the writer's personality, with the society, and with imagination, and what are the different types of literature. That all was the briefing of history of English literature. Now today, my dear students, we are going to start the very first period in the history of English literature, that is known as the Anglo-Saxon period, and that was started in 450 and was ended up in 1066. So my dear students, this is your lecture number 4. The outline or the overview of today's lecture is, in this class we'll discuss a brief history of early Britain, what is Anglo-Saxon or Old English. So my dear students, whenever I say Old English, so that means Anglo-Saxon, and whenever that is Anglo-Saxon, so automatically that is Old English as well. So you have to keep in mind Anglo-Saxon is, you can say, the synonym of Old English period. Then we'll talk about the brief history of Anglo-Saxons. These are basically the two tribes, and we'll talk about Anglo-Saxons in detail. Then Anglo-Saxon poetry and Anglo-Saxon prose. And last but not the least topic for today's discussion would be literary works during the period. So my dear students, you have to keep in mind this outline, and we'll talk about all these things in other periods as well. So let's take a start with the history of early Britain. So that this question can also come in your mind, that who were the early settlers in Britain. So this is a very common question as well, so that can come in your mind also. So I'll tell you, basically in ancient times Britain was inhabited by Iberians, of whom little is known. So basically we don't have proper records of Iberians in the books of history, but basically this is assumed, or you can say like according to some stories, it is assumed that in ancient times Britain was inhabited by the Iberians. The beginning of settlement in Britain took place in 2000 and 1200 BC. The beginning of settlement in Britain took place in about 2000 and 1200 BC. So before 2000, basically, a very little is known that who were basically the settlers in Britain. So we don't have any proper record of the people who were living in Britain before 2000 AD. The early settlers were certain Celtic-speaking tribes called Britons. So basically these Celtic-speaking tribes were called Britain, from whom the island got its name as well, Britain, the land of Britain. So basically what you have to keep in your mind is that the early settlers are the Celtic-speaking tribes. So we give them the name Britons as well, and they were basically the Britons, and we'll start history of English literature with these Celtic tribes. We'll talk about their religions and their culture and their social values and everything, and then we'll move towards Anglo-Saxon. Right now, dear students, I am just giving you the briefing of the early settlers in the Britain. So my 1, 2, 3, 4. So my dear students, here I'm just giving you the briefing of the early settlers in Britain, because this thing is also very much important. You should know, because you should know about the language, about the culture and everything, in order to understand history of English literature well, and then its influence on British literature. Basically these are known as the pre-Romans as well. As you know that we were talking about the Celtic speaking tribes, and they were also known as the Britons. So these were pagans. So pagan is a name of a religion. You can say this is against Christianity as well. Okay, so the Celts were pagans and the religion was known as animism, a Latin word for spirit. So their religion means a spirit. So this is basically a Latin word for the word spirit. So their religion was animism, and So what you have to keep in mind that we are taking a start of a history of English literature from the Celtic speaking tribes. They were pagans, and their religion was also and their religion was known as animism, a Latin name for spirit. Okay, here again you can see that we are talking about Britons. We are talking about Celtic tribes basically. The Britons were primitive Bronze Age people. They lived in round wooden huts and were mainly farmers. So their business was basically farming, and they used to live in round wooden huts, and you can see that they were not as such you can say modern people, and they were quite usually people say that they were very stupid and very innocent kind of people. They lived as tribes with the king or queen as the leader. So basically here you can see that for safety purposes they used to live with the kings and queens. So they belong to certain tribes, and there is always a king or a queen along with them all the time, who usually used to take care of them. Now, as you know that we were talking about the Celtic tribes here. So the Roman conquest. What is the meaning of conquest? According to the Oxford Dictionary, this is act of taking control of a country or city by force. So this is act of taking control, basically to control any country, to control any city by using force. So here force can be, you can say, any materialistic force, or by spreading the culture or the language in that very country. So basically the concept of conquest is to control any country, to control any city by using force. For example, you can use your army, you can use different weapons, you can use police in order to control any city or any country, or you can say any group of people. In 55 BC, Britain was invaded by the Roman general Julius Caesar. So here you can see that for the very first time in the history of Britain, it was invaded by Roman general Julius Caesar, and that happened in 55 BC. So now you should know that who invaded Britain for the first time in the history of British you can say literature. The Britons fought bitterly against the Romans conquerors for about 100 years. So you can say this was a 100 years war, and it is very much significance in the history of English literature as well, because it has a clear influence on the literature of that times as well. So the Britons, so my dear students, please tell me who were the Britons at that time. So you are very right that the Celtic tribes were the Britons, and they fought against the Roman conquerors for 100 years and were not completely subjugated to the Roman Empire until 78 AD. So here you can say that they were not successful in fight against the Roman Empire of that time. With the Roman conquest, the Roman mode of life and civilization came across to Britain also. For example, this culture is strongly related to the ruling class as well. So when Romans, they came in Britain, so they came across to Britain with their culture, with their language, with their traditions and everything. So I'll explain it to you. These are the Romans. So here you can see these are the Romans and these are the Britons. So when they came over here, when they conquered Britain, so definitely they had come up with their proper language, with their culture, with their tradition, and most importantly their religion. To continue with the Roman conquest, as I told you that the definition which is present in Oxford Dictionary is that it is an act of taking control of any country or city by using force. So here we are talking about the Roman conquest, how they conquered Britain in 55 BC. Basically, the Romans introduced their civilization and language and built towns, roads, baths, and temples. So basically, Romans are very much, you can say, famous for their civilization. So when they came to Britain, they promoted their civilization, their language, and they built, towns and very beautiful roads, very beautiful buildings, baths, and temples. So here you can see that the Celtic speaking tribes, they were not modern as such. For over a century they tried to conquer Caledonia, Scotland, but did not succeed. So this is a fight that is comprised of over a century. So they fought against Scotland and Caledonia for about 100 years, but they could not get success. In the end, King Hadrian ordered building of a wall across the north of England. So here you can see when they were not successful in getting success against these people, so then their king ordered them to build a wall across the north of England. So here you can see that Caledonia and Scotland, they were on the north side of England. So that is why the king ordered the army, you can say, or the people of their country to have a wall over there. So in this way the Caledonian army or the Scottish army, they would not be able to enter in their country. So that is basically for the safety of their country. The Roman conquest ended in 410 AD. So it was started in 55 BC with the arrival of Julius Caesar in Britain, and it was ended in 410 AD. So this is very much important, that what are, you can say, the results of the Roman Empire or the Roman rulers on that country, Britain. Fine. So my dear students, you can memorize these one by one as well, that they established camps that eventually became towns. So basically they started with the camps, and with the passage of time these camps, they became towns. Maintained relative peace. So here you can see that Celtics, they might not be peaceful people, so they brought peace in Britain as well. Here we are talking about the Roman rulers, that they brought peace in Britain as well. Latin heavily influenced the English language. So these Roman empires, they used to use Latin language. So there is a great influence of English. So 1, 2, 3. So there is a great influence of Latin language on English language as well. So hopefully you are doing these things, like the influence of one language on another in the history of English language as well in detail. So basically the point is that their language was Latin, and the people who were living in England, their language was English basically. So what happened? Latin started influencing English language with the passage of time. Christianity began to replace paganism. So these Romans were the Christians. So they brought religion with them as well. So basically here you can see that they brought their civilization in Britain, they brought peace there, and there is an influence of Latin language on English language, plus the religious practices. Basically they replaced pagans with Christianity, so they brought another concept, like a very new concept of Christianity in England. So here, my dear students, you can see that the Roman empires, they introduced Christianity in Britain, especially after St. Augustine converts King Aldebert in 597. Basically, the point is that we take start with the history of English, you can say English people, or history of Britain, that who were the earliest settler over there in Britain. So here you can see that it was Rome who first conquered Britain in 55 BC with the arrival of Julius Caesar on their country, and these are the effects of their rule over England. Now you might be confused that basically we were talking about Anglo-Saxon period of English literature. Where is Anglo-Saxon? We are continuously talking about Celtic tribes and Roman conquest or something like that. Where is Anglo-Saxon or Old English? So here, my dear students, basically we are going to talk about in detail Anglo-Saxon and, or you can say Old English. That is another name of Anglo-Saxon English as well. The earliest phase of English literature, as I told you before, that how do we divide periods in history. So there are certain elements which are involved in defining a period in history. So basically this Anglo-Saxon period is the very first period in the history of English literature. Anglo and Saxons, two tribes occupied Britain. So these are basically two tribes who occupied Britain, Anglo and Saxons. So basically you have to keep in mind that Anglo and Saxon, they were two tribes who occupied Britain. English was the common language of these tribes. So these were the English-speaking tribes. Anglo and Saxons, these were the English-speaking tribes, and they occupied Britain. Before they occupied Britain, they lived along the coast of Sweden and Denmark. So basically when they came to Britain, before that they used to live along the coast of Sweden and Denmark. The land which they occupied was called England. So here you can see this is not England, this is England-land. So the land which basically they occupied was called England. These tribes were fearless, adventurous and brave. So these are the qualities of these tribes, Anglo and Saxons. And previously when they came to Britain, before that they used to live along the coast of Sweden and Denmark. When they came over here, so you can see that they are adventurous, they are fearless and they are brave people. Dear students of MA English, here you can see that they sang at the feast about battles, gods and their heroes. So they had certain heroes at that time, so they used to sing songs which are based on battles, on gods and on their heroes as well. Some of their chiefs were also bards. So brad means writers or poets. So here you can see some of their chiefs, some of their lords, some of their rulers, they were also bards, or the higher authorities who belong to army might be, they are also writers and poets. Through their songs of religion, English poetry began in the ancient England. So here, my dear students, you can see that basically poetry was a source of expressing their religious thoughts. So through their songs of religion, so basically they used to use poetry in their religious songs. So with the passage of time, it was So with the passage of time, English poetry began in the ancient England as well. So it was very much popular among the masses over there, that they all used to sing their songs, religious songs, in English language. Britain was still a Roman province. So previously, as you can see, we took a start with the with the Celtic tribes. Okay, the Celtic people, they used to live over there, and they were pagans. Okay, so next thing was the Roman conquerors, that in 55 BC, with the arrival of Julius Caesar, the Roman empires, basically he was a Roman ruler, they Roman rulers, they conquered Britain in 55 BC. Okay, next thing is that the Anglo-Saxon tribes, they conquered Britain, but here you can see that no matter that the Anglo-Saxon, they have arrived in Britain and they have conquered Britain as well, and they have occupied Britain, but still Britain was a Roman province, because most of the Romans were living over there. So you know, the Latin was their language. So here you can see that it would be, you might be thinking that it would be very difficult task for Anglo-Saxon to spread up their language, their culture and their literature in that very country. Okay, Anglo and Saxons, they first landed in England in the middle of 5th century, and by 670 AD they occupied almost whole country. So here you can see that they landed in England in the middle of 5th century. So that might be 450 or after that. So they arrived in England at the middle of 5th century, and by 676, okay, 1, 2, 3, and by 670 AD they occupied almost whole country. They came as conquerors, and they came as, you can say, the part of the winning team, or they defeated the Romans over there. So they arrived in England as conquerors. They made England their permanent home. So they were not thinking that they are here for few years, or you can say for 1 century only, or for 50 years, or for 60 years. They made England their permanent home. That thinking was very much common those days, that England is their place. They became instructors of English race as well. They ruled till 1066. So here you can see that they came in England in the middle of 5th century, and they ruled over England till 1066. Harold, the last Saxon king, was defeated in the Battle of Hastings by William the Conqueror of Normandy, France. So here you can see, my dear students, that the Harold was the last Anglo-Saxon king, and he was defeated in the Battle of Hastings by William the Conqueror. So I'll explain it to you. This is Harold. And he was defeated by William. He was the Duke of Normandy. So my dear students, here you can see that William the Conqueror of Normandy, France, he was the Duke of Normandy as well. He conquered Britain once again, and he defeated Harold, and he was the last Saxon king. Here we are moving towards the background of Anglo-Saxon language. This is a branch of Indo-European family of languages. It has same root words, for example, for father and for mother. Basically right now here we are talking about, previously we were talking about the history of Britain or England. So right now we are talking about their language. What was their language? So basically the language which was spoken by the Anglo-Saxon tribes, that was a branch of Indo-European family of languages, and it has the same root words for, you can say, father and mother, God and man, and common needs and common relations of life, as we find in Sanskrit, Iranian, Greek and Latin. So these are also Indo-European languages. So here you can see that they have the common, like their language, Anglo-Saxon tribes, which they used to speak there in England, their language had same words for father and mother, for God and man, and for common needs and common relations of life. So basically the basic terminology or the basic naming thing that is present there in Sanskrit as well, in Iranian language, and Greek and Latin. So here you can, that is why we can say that this belongs to one of the branches of Indo-European family of languages. So now here you can see that gradually we are moving towards, we took a start with the Anglo-Saxon, that how they invaded England, and then we went towards language, and now we are here on another part, that is literature. Much of the Anglo-Saxon poetry is lost because there was a tradition of singing the songs, and most of the Anglo-Saxon poetry was in oral form and not in the written form. That is why we don't have the proper record of the Anglo-Saxon poetry. So it is assumed that much of the Anglo-Saxon poetry is lost. Only some fragments are left. You can say in some pieces there is no proper form of Anglo-Saxon poetry today. There are only some fragments. There are some pieces of one poem, or you can say one book, or any book of prose. Some of the things are present here today. Okay, so much of the English poetry is lost because they did not keep it safe. There was an oral tradition only of singing the poetry in the religious songs, so that's why we don't have the written record. Poems. So here, as you know, that we are talking about old literature or the Anglo-Saxon literature. Both are same things, as you know. So poems. This is Widsith, describes continental. These are the very famous poems you can see in the Anglo-Saxon period of history of English literature. Widsith describes continental courts visited in migration by a far wandering poet. So here you can see that this is by an anonymous poet as well, and it talks about the continental courts here. So basically literature is a reflection of society, so whatever is happening in the society, that would be saved in form of literature there. So here you can see the continental courts. These were very much common those days, so that is part of that was basically part of this poem Widsith. Another poem which is very much famous from Anglo-Saxon literature is The Flight at Phoebusburg, and it deals with the same favorite thesis of battle against fearful odds. So there was a battle going on. So basically their theme, this poem's theme was based on battle. Complaint of Dear, this is another poem, and it describes the disappointment of a lover. So my dear students, here you can see that whatever is there, for example the continental courts were very much common over there. So in the first poem, that was the theme of that poem. Another thing was the battle. Okay, so here you can see that the battle was the theme, and in the complaint of Dear, it is a disappointment of a lover. So here we are moving towards love or the romance things as well, from fear to love. The very important work, or you can say a very significant work in the entire history of English literature, that is an epic, a very long poem, and the name of the poem is Beowulf, and it is the most important poem of this period, and we do have the record of this poem as well, and this is a very important poem. So we'll talk about Beowulf in detail. What were the themes in Anglo-Saxon poetry? So basically, as you know, that we are dealing with the history of English literature, so these things, these are very much important things, like to talk about themes and the characters, and basically, you know, what were the subject matters of that time. So what were basically the themes of Anglo-Saxon poetry? There were 5 great principles. Number 1, love of personal freedom. Number 2, that was the responsiveness to nature. Third one is the religion, and fourth one is the love of womanhood, and fifth one is the struggle for glory. So basically all their poems and other literary works, they revolve around these 5 principles. Either they talk about love of personal freedom, or love for womanhood, or you can say about religion, or the struggle for glory. Basically these are the basic themes of Anglo-Saxon poetry, and all the poems they would revolve against these 5 principles. principles, and these 5 principles are reflected in their literature. So whenever you read Beowulf or any other poem from the Anglo-Saxon poetry, so definitely one of these principles would be present there, or more than one even. Let's talk about Beowulf. As I told you that this is a very significant work in the entire history of English literature. So the name of the poem, or you can say epic, that is Beowulf. This is a greatest Germanic epic in the world of literature. So again, this is a very long poem. This is an epic. This is a tale of adventures of Beowulf, the hero. Basically, Beowulf is the name of the hero, and this is a long tale which is based on his adventures of life, and he is the protagonist, he is the hero of this poem. Okay, here we are talking about Beowulf, a champion and slayer of monsters. He was a champion and slayer of monsters, and this poem is full of all sorts of references and allusions to great events. So basically this poem is an allegory as well, and you know, that was written in Old English, plus it was full of different references and allusions, or you can say indirect way of conveying anything. And it is relevant to the fortunes of kings and nations as well. So that is why this poem is very much important, because it deals with the fortunes of kings and nations as well. And you can say it deals with the very traditional theme of rise and the fall of different nations, and you can say the climax and the rise and fall of the kings and nations. Old English poetry, as you know, Beowulf is a very significant work in Old English period. Few books were written, most of those were written in Latin for religious purposes, because you know, most of the people over there, they used to use Latin for religious purposes, and you can say that you know, England was still a Roman Empire, and Romans language was Latin, and basically they performed their all religious duties and prayers in Latin language. So most of the work of the Anglo-Saxon poetry were written in Latin language, because there was a tradition among Romans and among Anglo-Saxons as well to write something about their religion. So this was a very common practice over there. But the thing was that much of their literature, which you can find out even today, that is written in Latin and not in English language. What are the earliest works written in Old English? So that can be a question, okay? So first of all, I'll tell you basically what are the works which are written in Old English. 4 books of Old English poetry exist even today. This is basically the literature which you can even find today. As I told you before, that much of the literature that is lost, because they had the tradition of using oral poetry, and they didn't have any written record of their poetry or other kind of literature. So basically there are 4 books which are available even today, and you can consult them as well. So these are the stories from the Old Testament turned into Old English poetry. So this is one book that is still available. Another book which is still available, that is Christian poems based on themes from the New Testament or lives of saints. So basically these are the religious books as well. So Old Testament and Christian poems, the very name suggests you that these are based on religious themes. An anthology of different short poems. So this is basically an anthology, like too many poems would be there in one book, which are written by different poets. Okay, my dear students, here you can see that this is a written form of literature, but it was banned in 1731, and it is preserved in British Museum in London. So this is just you can say heritage of English people today, because nobody can understand Old English nowadays. So there are too many changes in English with the passage of time, because English is not a dead language, so very flexible language. Too many words we delete, and too many words we add in order to enhance its vocabulary, and we remove the dead words. So with the passage of time, after too many centuries, this is known as Old English, and we cannot understand that English. That is why it is saved in the British Museum that is there in London. So this Beowulf is an epic, and that is preserved in the museum only, and you can use it for research purposes, or if you want to have a look on that, that's it. But the themes and the characters, we have a clear description of those characters and those themes which are still available. Okay, here my dear students, you can see that this is the first page of the Beowulf manuscript. So here you can see that this is written in hand, because at that time there wasn't any tradition of typing any book. So here you can see that this is written in manuscript, and this is the first page of the poem or of the epic Beowulf. So here it is truly very difficult to understand this, you can say, Old English. So if you want to know about Old English sounds and what are the differences between Old English and English today, so you can visit this link. In order to know about the English sounds or the English Old English phonetics. So the sounds would be available there on this link, that's www.engl.virginia.edu, and the rest of the link you can also note down, and you can see that the sounds or the phonetics of Old English is available here on this link. So you can please note down the link. Old English poetry, our ignorance about Beowulf. So basically this is like we usually take Beowulf in a very traditional way. So here what you have to notice is that was it a traditional heroic story written down by a monk and then recopied by other monks, 1 2 3, and then recopied by other monks who added a thin veneer of Christian moralizing to a basically pagan tale. So basically we'll have to decide after looking at certain themes and different characters, or after looking at the story of Beowulf, that it is basically a pagan tale, or it is about Christianity, or who wrote it. So definitely that is in the reader's hand. Okay, was it written by a scholar trying to create something like the great Latin epic, the Aeneid? So this is another epic which is written in the Latin language. So here you can see this, maybe Beowulf was written by a scholar in order to create an impression, or in order to keep a record in the history of English literature that this epic was written by a great scholar. Maybe he copied the great Latin epic, that the name of the epic is Aeneid. What is Beowulf? As you can see that there, this is a landmark in the history of English literature as well, and we do have the records of Beowulf even today, which are available even today in the written form as well, and that is preserved in the British Museum even now. So what you can do is that here you can see the picture of a hero as well. This is a picture of a hero having a sword in his hands. So basically this is you can say Beowulf. The poem called Beowulf was composed sometimes between the middle of the 7th and the end of the 10th century. So it was composed, so here it has a very long tradition, and that was started in the middle of 7th century, and it ended up at the end of the 10th century of the first millennium in the language that is today called Anglo, Saxon or Old English. So here my students, my dear students, you can see that basically it was written in Anglo-Saxon or Old English. It is a heroic narrative, more than 3,000 lines long. That is why this is known as an epic, because it is more than 3,000 lines long. Okay, so this is an epic concerning the deeds of a Scandinavian prince. So basically Beowulf was a Scandinavian prince. Basically this is a story of the Scandinavian prince Beowulf, also called Beowulf, and it stands at as one of the foundation works of poetry in English. So as I'm telling you again and again, so this is the foundation, one of the foundation works of poetry in English. It was in poetic form, and it was about a Scandinavian hero. The name of the hero was Beowulf, and you can see that he was very adventurous, very brave as well. Through this picture you can build up his image as well in your mind. So basically what you have to notice from this slide is that Beowulf was written in Anglo-Saxon or Old English, okay, and that was a heroic narrative as well, that the hero is telling his story to the audience, okay, and this is more than 3,000 lines long, and it deals with the deeds of a Scandinavian prince. And here you can see that the name of the prince was Beowulf. So this is a foundation work as well in the history of. So these are the important points from the slides, that it is written in Anglo-Saxon or Old English, and it is comprised of more than 3,000 lines, and it is in the heroic narrative as well, and the name of the hero was Beowulf, and this is one of the foundation works of poetry in English. That is why Beowulf is very much important. Okay, here you can see the analysis of Beowulf as well. This is basically comprised of 3,182 lines, and chief literary monument of the Old English period. So basically this is a very significant work in the history of English literature or in Old English period. Author is unknown. As you can see that most of the Anglo-Saxon poetry that is lost because that's not in the written form. Okay, another thing is that most of the work that are written by the anonymous writers, okay, likely composed in 8th century by monk putting down oral tradition. So basically that was again an oral tradition with a mixture of Christian tenets, a unique combo of Germanic pagan heroism and early Christian teaching worldview. So basically this is about Germanic pagan heroism and early Christian teaching. So basically this Beowulf is a combination of Christianity and paganism as well, fine. So basically this poem that was also told to somebody in an oral form, but still we do have the records, and I'll tell you how. It was first printed in the 19th century. So with the passage of time, like through different, you can say by talking, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. So here you can see that it was first printed in the 19th century. That is why now we can see that we do have the written record of Beowulf today, okay. Before 19th century, it was just in oral form there, present there, like you pass on one message to another generation, it was there, but still we cannot say that how much of the work has been edited till 19th century. So we don't have the proper record of it, okay. So what is basically the background of Beowulf? Setting not in England but in early period in Scandinavia. So basically, as I told you, that the hero of Beowulf, he is a Scandinavian hero. So here you can see that the settings, or you can say the environment over there was not in England, that was in the Scandinavia, though it has been transformed into a uniquely English text. So later on it was transformed into English text. So in the heroic age of Germanic people, 5th and 6th century. So basically this is based on the heroic age of Germanic people, okay, those who belong to 5th and 6th centuries, okay. And then this Beowulf celebrates a past century old glorified by oral tradition. So basically this is about different centuries, and this is glorified by the oral tradition as well. Like with the passage of time you keep on telling your children something, and in the 19th century you can find out the proper written record of Beowulf later on, but not before that, because they had the oral tradition of telling the stories or telling, you can say, sharing poetry with somebody else. So basically this is about the heroic age of Germanic people, plus that was about the past centuries as well. Okay, with Beowulf, there is a proper beginning of poetry in the Anglo-Saxon period. Okay, use of, you can say, the poetic devices which were used in Beowulf. There are too many contrasts. For example, man-filled heroine versus lonely Grendel talking among corpses. So Grendel is also one of the character over there. So here you can see the contrastive elements are there. How the poet, or you can say the anonymous writer of the poem Beowulf, contrasted, you can say, different people with different things. Okay, early use of symbolism. So here you can say that for the very first time, the writer of the Beowulf, or you can say the poet of the Beowulf, started using symbols in the poem. You can say this, one of the symbolism here, Beowulf hangs Grendel's arm on wall, symbol of victory. So this is a symbol of victory, to hang somebody's arm on wall. So basically this is about you can say killing somebody or to win any battle. Okay, hyperbole, this is another literary device. So this is, for example, I'm giving you examples as well. For example, struggle so fierce, even the mighty hero is threatened. So this is this is a hyperbole. Fine. So here you can see the use of contrast, like how do you contrast somebody with any other thing, and there is symbolism as well, and there is hyperbole. So we'll talk about different literary devices in detail later on. Alliteration, this is another poetic beginning as well, that was started in in Beowulf. The most striking feature in Beowulf is the use of alliteration. So my dear students, do you know what do we mean by alliteration? You might have studied it while doing your bachelor's or FSc. It was there, alliteration, because it is part of almost all the poems. So don't worry, I'll tell you. In alliterative words, certain accented words in a line begin with the same consonant sounds. For example, this idea will be clear to you with the example, like the certain words in one line only, they start with the same consonant sound. So my dear students, here you have to notice one thing for alliteration: the same consonant sounds. Okay, let's have a look on the example of alliteration. Of man he was the mildest and most beloved. So here you can see this is M, this is a consonant, and there is a repetition of the word M once again, that is in the mildest, and there is one more repetition, that is most, that is in most. Again you can see ma sounds are here, okay, in man, in mildest, and in most. So this is known as alliteration. To his kin and kindest, keenest and praise. So in the second line you can see this ka sound is here. This is a consonant sound, ka. So here you can see king, kindest, and keenest to praise. So this is the modern translation of poetry. Basically that was not in Beowulf, because Beowulf was written in Old English. As we do not know Old English, so it's very much difficult to define Old English or to give you any example of Old English in order to know about alliteration. So basically about alliteration, what you have to keep in mind, that these are the same consonant sound which are present in one verse and in different words. For example, in the first line you can see ma sound is present thrice. Number one, this is in man, the other one that is in mildest, and the third one is most. Okay, in the second line you can see ka sound is repeated thrice. One is in kin, the other one is in the kindest, and the third one is in the keenest. So this is the repetition of ka sound. As you know, the alliteration deals with the repetition of consonant sounds in one line. Okay, so in the first line this is ma sound, and in the second one this is ka sound, and this is the modern translation. Metaphor, this is another literary device which is commonly used by the poets and the writers as well. Fine. So what you have to keep in mind that the tradition of the metaphors was started in Beowulf. Okay. So ring givers is used for king. So ring giver, who is basically the ring giver who gives you something or who controls, for example, the whole country. So this metaphor is used for the king in the Beowulf. Okay. The hearth companions of his attendant warriors. Fine. So this is hearth companion that is used for the attendant warriors. Okay. The other one, that is the swan's bath or the whale's road of sea. So here you can see for whales, road of for sea, this swan's bath is used. Okay. And sea wood for ship. So here you can see for ship, that is made up of wood. So here you can see that the sea wood that is used for ship. So this is the metaphorical representation, like telling something through some other thing, fine, in an indirect way, in order to make in order to bring variety in your writing. So here you can see the kind of metaphors which were used in Beowulf. Such metaphors occur generally in great numbers in this work. So these metaphors are very much common in this work, the epic Beowulf. Okay, another thing which is very much important in the Anglo-Saxon poetry is their religion, the Christianity. Okay, so what you have to keep in mind, like Anglo-Saxons were the conquerors over there, and they made England their home, and you know, after some time the Anglo-Saxons, they embraced Christianity. Okay, and then what happened? The poets took up religious themes as the subject matter of poetry. So my dear students, here you can see that with the passage of time, when they embraced Christianity, so most of the poets, they took up religious themes as a subject matter, as a theme of their poetry. Okay, major portion of Anglo-Saxon poetry is religious. So there was a tradition among Anglo-Saxons to write poetry, to sing songs of religion in any particular kind of poetry. So that was a tradition over there. So you can find out major portion of Anglo-Saxon that is about the religious things. Okay, two important religious poets. So here we were talking about religious poems or the religious poets. Two important figures in the history of English literature. You can see, like here we are talking about Anglo-Saxon period and Christianity, and the two major poets were Cadmon and Cynewulf. Okay, now we'll talk about Cadmon first. He sang in series the whole story of the fate of man. So basically this is about the fate of man, and this is a religious, most of his works are based on religion. So basically this is a full-fledged series of the whole story that is again in epic form, and in that series he talks about the fate of man, from creation and the fall to the redemption and last judgment. So here you can see that, as you know, that this is about religious themes. So here you can see that in these series of the stories, here you can see that he talks about creation and the fall and the redemption and the last day of judgment. So basically this, he has done marvelous works in the history of English literature as well as far as the religious poetry is concerned. Okay, let me remind you students once again, what basically is this? Basically there was a tradition among the Anglo-Saxons to write, or you can say to sing religious songs in any form of you can say poetry. That is why we don't have a proper record of their poetry today. So this you can say Cadmon is one of the religious poets of that time. So what he talked about the fall and the redemption and the last day of judgment, and that is in form of a full-fledged story. So you can say here again that is a kind of epic as well, a long story. Another poet who is very much famous for writing religious poetry was Cynewulf. Okay, so his most important poem is the Crest. So here you can see the most important poem that is written by Cynewulf is the Crest. Okay, so this is a narrative of leading events of Christ's ministry upon earth. So basically, again, the religious theme is present over here. So basically, this poem is a narration of the events of Christ's ministry upon earth. So what happened with him with the passage of time, so how he came, everything is there in his poem, The Christ. Okay, Christ returned to judgment. So basically, point is that how this religious poetry was very much common among Anglo-Saxons. This is basically the point. Okay, and the most important point that is written by Cynewulf, that is Christ, and this is about the Christ ministry upon earth. Okay, another thing which is again very much important, previously we were talking about the oral tradition of using poetry in different songs or something like that. Here we are moving towards prose writing in the Anglo-Saxon period. The prose writing tradition was started in King Alfred's time. So basically this is based on King Alfred's translation from Latin, a common available prose. So basically the common available prose of that time was in Latin. So the prose tradition started off with the translation of that Latin prose into English, and who did so? King Alfred. So the literature was in Latin language, and because it was a common available prose. To translate something that was written in Latin language and to translate it now in English language in order to provide it to the common masses of your country. So basically the tradition of prose was started with the translation of Latin prose, and that was done by King Alfred. There was no broken prose of Anglo-Saxon period and Middle English period. So there wasn't any broke. There is a continuous flow between you can say from Anglo-Saxon period of writing prose to the medieval period or the Middle English period. As you know that comparatively prose is easy to understand. If you compare prose to poetry, poetry has certain literary elements or poetic devices and to convey the indirect meaning or to compare one thing with another thing. So that is a bit difficult to understand. If we talk about prose, so this is comparatively easy to understand. Okay, everybody can understand because that is written in you can say in simple English or simple language, so it is quite easy to understand and quite easy to comprehend as well. Okay, prose based on religious instructions. So again, previously when we were talking about the religious songs and the things, so that was a part of poetry. So here prose, basically all the religious instructions were available in prose, what to do and what not to do, what to follow and what not to follow, everything was there in prose. And it was like a prose is a genre where you can use very simple language. Two great pioneers of English prose were Alfred the Great and Ælfric. So my dear students, here you can see that Alfred, he was the king of that time and he is known as the Alfred the Great, and the other one is Ælfric. So basically the two great pioneers of English prose who started prose tradition in Anglo-Saxon from the Anglo-Saxon period, they were King Alfred the Great and Ælfric. Alfred the Great, the glorious king of Wessex. So here you can see that he was the king of the state of Wessex, fine, and he's translated a number of Latin works in English. So he did a very marvelous job because all the literature was available in Latin language, so it was very much difficult for the English people to understand that Latin literature. So that is why, for the purpose of getting that literature understood by the common people of the society, he translated he translated Latin literature into English in order to provide in order to give English people in order to give English people an opportunity to read Latin literature and to know about their traditions and everything. Okay, another prominent figure in prose writing was Alfric. He was a priest and he wrote sermons in a sort of poetic prose. So basically sermons, these are the religious songs, you can say. So those were written in like in a sort of poetic prose. To some extent it was poetry, but not that much in a difficult way. Basically he was a priest, and King Alfred, he was the king of Wessex. Fine. So here, my dear students, you can see, you have to keep in mind two great prose writers in Anglo-Saxon period. One was the great King Alfred, and the other one Alfric. Okay, there is another prose writer. Okay, the name of the writer is Bede, and he is the father of English history as well. He wrote Historia Ecclesia Gentis Anglorum. Okay, basically that is in Latin, and he is you can say a Roman writer as well. He wrote this book in 631. Okay, and later on it was translated by King Alfred, and the name of the book, and he was an Anglo-Saxon king, you have to keep in mind. Fine. So basically this book was in Latin. Basically he translated this work that was in Latin, and King Alfred translated this work into English, and the name of the book now was the Ecclesiastical History of English People, and he translated this work in 891. So my dear students, here you can see that Bede, he is the father of English history as well. So he wrote a book that was in Latin, and later on in 891 it was translated by King Alfred. So this is a great landmark as well. So basically he covers. So basically the point of translating this was that he covers the Roman invasion of Britain to AD 731, and it was, you can say, the 4 years before the author's death. So he covers all the events of the history in that book. King Alfred is a very prominent figure in the history of English literature. So what are his contributions in English literature? He translated too many books from Latin, including Bede's History. So basically the Bede's History, like Bede's history books which were available in Latin language, and you can say he translated his works into English language later on. Okay, so this is, you can say, one of the contributions, one of his contributions to English literature. His free way of translation helped him to write in a natural style in English. So basically he used to write in a very natural way without using any kind of difficult terminologies or using metaphors or other poetical devices. That is why he has a very natural style of using English. His contributions to the development of that is why his contributions are very well known, because he used to write in a very natural, in a very free style that everybody could understand it. Okay, he is very much famous for launching the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, also known as Old English Chronicle. So again here, my dear students, you can see Anglo-Saxon and Old English. So Chronicle here, he is very much, sorry, 1 2 3. So basically he is very much famous for launching the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, that is a historical register of national events from dim past to his own age. So basically Chronicle, what is Chronicle? Do you know what do we mean by chronicles? Okay, if not, then I'll tell you. Chronicle is basically the year by year or the month by month detail of something. So here you can see that this is relevant to history as well. So he made a historical register of all the national events from dim past to his own age. That is why this is known as Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Okay, this work was continued by monks long after his death. So basically this after his death, after King Alfred's death, this work was continued by monks after his death. 1 2 3. After his death, this work was continued by the monks. So this is another contribution into the history of English literature. Previously he translated, as we talked about, Bade's history, and then he has a very natural style, and he wrote Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, that is a historical register of all the national events. Okay, my dear students, as you know that we took a start of today's lecture from the earliest settlers in England, that who were the earliest settlers. We started our discussion with the Iberians, about whom a little is known, and then we moved towards the Celtic speaking tribes, and the religion was pagan, and how they were you can say conquered by the Romans in 55 BC by the Roman Empire, you can say by the Roman ruler Julius Caesar, and you can see that they have a quite long history there. And then we took a start with Anglo-Saxons, that how these are the two tribes, and these were the English speaking tribes as well, and previously they were not Christians, and Britain at that time, that was still a Roman province at that time. So with the passage of time, Anglo-Saxon, they also embraced Christianity, and at that time the theme of their poems and of all their writings, that was religion, because most of their religious songs were in form of poetry, and they have the oral tradition. That is why Old English, or this Anglo-Saxon English literature, is not available today because of their oral tradition of that time, of using poetry and prose of that time. Then we talked about some of the significant works in some of the significant works in Anglo-Saxon history. What happened there? There was a very popular epic with the name of the Beowulf, and we talked about Beowulf in detail, and who were the characters over there, and previously what were the themes. And then we discussed the 5 principles about whom, you can say, all of the Anglo-Saxon poetry was written, and it was based upon those 5 principles. Then we talked about prose, and who were the prose writers of that time, and then King Alfred's a very prominent figure in the history of English literature because of his works, because he translated Bade's history, and then he translated too many other Latin works into English language in order to give English people an exposure to the literature. And then he wrote he wrote Anglo-Saxon Chronicles as well, that is basically based upon different national events of a certain period of time. So basically that is all about the history and the influence of Roman culture on English speaking country. Basically the point here, you can see, is still, okay my dear students, what you have to take care of is that this is England and English. Okay, that is their language. So what you have to do here, the effect of Celtic tribes, you can see, basically these are the natives, okay, and then you can see the Romans, okay, and here you can discuss about the Anglo-Saxons, okay, and along with these things you can talk about religion, languages, translations, okay, from Latin to English. So basically, my dear students, what you have to keep in mind that this is the place England, fine. So this is the place England, fine. So what you have to do, that's who were the early, you can say earlier settlers in England, because they basically they were the Celtic tribes, and they were invaded by the Roman rulers in 55 BC, and the name of the ruler Roman ruler was Julius Caesar. And later on, the Roman Empire, you can say the Rome 1, 2, 3. The Roman empires were, sorry, 1, 2, 3. And later on, you can see that the Roman rulers, they were defeated by the Anglo-Saxon tribes, and they were not Christians, and basically still they made England their home. And you can see like how they promoted their culture over there. They were very adventurous, very brave people. Okay, so here you can see that basically this England, this English speaking, you can say country, which is now an English speaking country, so it has an influence of too many other cultures on it. Okay, so how they have the Roman tradition, Roman civilization still there, Roman literature is there, literature is still present in Latin language over there. Okay, basically the culture is that of the Romans, and later on it was translated by King Alfred in English language. There was just a difference on the level of language only. Basically the literature was that of Romans. Okay, and then we talked about Beowulf and what are basically their common themes of their poetry and then of prose. And then you can see that there is a continuity of prose throughout Anglo-Saxon and then the Anglo-Norman period. There is no breakdown there. Okay, as you know, Anglo-Saxon poetry later on, when it entered into Anglo-Norman, so there was a break. Okay, so in prose there wasn't any break. So in this regard, we talked about the poets, and you can see we talked about this thing as well, that most of the works which are done by the anonymous writers, okay, we do not know who wrote them. Okay, and how Beowulf was later on translated, and here, my dear students, you can see that how it was later on written in 19th century, and the record of, we cannot understand even a single word from Beowulf because that is written in Old English. Okay, this transcript is same, and that was written in the manuscript, because at that time we didn't have the tradition of typing anything, or printing machines were not present there. So that was written in manuscript form. And then we talked about about King Alfred's contributions in English literature, that how he promoted literature in the society by translating Roman literature that was written in Latin language into English in order to give his people an exposure to the world. Okay, so basically that was all about today. And the references, the reference books which I have used for today's lecture are A Critical History of English Literature by Dr. Malik, and A Critical History of English Literature by David Ditches, and A Dictionary of Literary Terms by Martin Gray. So as students, you know that these are your course books as well, so you can take the rest of the details or anything which is confusing for you from the book. So basically the concept is that you should, as I tell you in every lecture, that you have to take history as a story, not as something boring or something that is in chronological order only to know about dates, to remember dates and different events. Not like this. Take it like a story, make a story of it, enjoy it, and definitely you'll get the things in an easier way then. Okay, I hope the concepts of Anglo-Saxon literature are quite clear to you now. So if you do not get anything, so I'll repeat the things time and again in the at the start of the next lecture as well, so you can get to know about the things there as well. So I hope you are getting the things, and I'm trying to make my lectures very easy for you, and the things which are very easily understandable. Okay, so and I'm trying to explain all the terminologies and all the important events of the history and the important works and which are written by different poets and writers of any particular era. Basically the concept must be clear to you. So inshallah, see you again with another lecture that is about Anglo-Norman period in the history of English literature. So have a nice day. Allah Hafiz.